Yossi?
I don't know where Yossi is. Maybe he's here. Okay, we are on 2B, or page 199.
Not too good?
Huh?
We're not.
To be or not to be. This week is to be, but if it depends how much we cover, maybe we even go to the next page, possibly. So I could recap, but I'm not going to really recap because last week we actually concluded a section of the Talmud, which explained the first part of the Mishnah that said that the villagers read starting from the 11th through to the 14th. And we wanted to figure out how and why, and where do we know that from, and the different opinions, and the opinions of before the temple was destroyed, after the temple was destroyed, does it still apply, etc., etc. According to our Mishnah, which is a Stam Mishnah, it's an anonymous Mishnah, according to Rabbi Akiva, before the temple, after the temple, all villagers, it applies that they can read even starting from 11th. There was one exception, if you recall, that we're going to learn in the next Mishnah, but we already quoted it. Who remembers the exception?
The world cities, or
No, one exception when villagers even nowadays do not have the permission to read before the 14th.
Oh, even if they have to go into town?
yeah, when they don't go.
Villagers who
to town.
don't
when they normally,
have
it's
the
not their
custom to go
Right,
into
when-
town.
When they don't go into town.
So then it's of no reason to. In other words, we want them to read on the regular day. That's Yom Tov, that everybody reads. It's just a dispensation for them to be able to read earlier for their convenience. But if they don't need that, then we don't want to give it to them.
Robert, what is that little S thing there? If
So-
in English?
I don't know. It's not in the original. But what I assume is it's a new section. Like in the original Gemara, I think there's 2 dots over here, right? In the original
No,
Gemara,
that's the same thing, or something similar.
okay, well, that's he put it in. But sorry, Megillah, in the original Gemara, yeah, it's an S. So it's like a new section. What it's doing is, I don't know what it's doing. It's a new section.
Now, we are on, is it page 4?
Base Amud base, page 4, yes.
And where would it be?
We were about 12 lines down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 lines down.
Oh, correct. Okay, there.
Karaki Mamukaf.
Oh, there is an S there.
Yeah, it's the
Yes,
same thing.
that's
But
that's
that's
not.
also added by him. It's not in
It's also not. When I grew up, it wasn't in my Gemara. He put in punctuation. He put in
Right.
vowelization, everything.
Yeah.
New section.
No, not 50, page 4. Like 1, 2, 3, 4.
You want to learn from the original today?
No.
When are we gonna get there?
Huh?
When are we gonna learn from the original?
Let's do a little bit more.
Okay, next week.
Maybe.
All right, the next passage of the Mishnah taught us that what? The Mishnah ruled villages, the regular day of Purim is the 14th. All cities, all people should read on the 14th. Villages have the dispensation, if necessary, they can read starting from the 11th, on a Monday and a Thursday before the 14th. And another exception are walled cities. Walled cities, walled from when? Right. In other words, what if nowadays it's not walled, but in the times of Yeshua it was walled? When did they read? On the 15th. Yeah. If it was walled in the times of Yeshua, they read on the 15th. Why? Why? Or where do you know that from? So before we start, because the Gemara's first question is always going to be like it was last time, Mino Hanemili. And before we ask the different question, Mino Alan, from where do you know it? This time we're asking Mino Hanemili. I'm not sure the difference between the two, but they're asking the same question. Where do we know this from? What's the source for this ruling? So before we start, I want to bring your attention to these 3 verses of the Megillah. We've read them before, but we're going to read them again. I can't read it if I face it to you. It's not double-sided. The Megillah, chapter 9. Therefore, says the Megillah, the scattered Jews. That's my translation. In the original, it's Alkain Haprazim. the Prazim, remember that word, Prazim, the scattered Jews, who live spread out, make the 14th day of the month of Adar, a day of joy and feasting and a festive day and of sending portions to one another. That is the enactment, how to celebrate Purim.
When it says scattered Jews, it means outside of Israel?
I don't know what that means. I'm just reading what the verse says. Okay, then a few verses later, Mordechai inscribed these things and sent letters to all Jews who were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both near and far, notifying everybody we're establishing this day as a festival, to enjoin them to make the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the month thereof every year into a festival. If you want to see it on the screen, you can see it on the screen. Anything strange about these verses, by the way? Besides the language of the scattered Jews, which is my language. Compare the first one and the third one.
Okay, the 14th day.
Right, the third one.
Okay, the
14th
third
and
one
15th.
added the 15th.
First it says celebrate on the 14th. Then it says celebrate on the 14th and the 15th. And you'll see I've also put in one of the Hebrew words. Which Hebrew word did I put in?
Vezot. I can't read it.
Ve'et.
Vet.
Which means?
And.
Why did I put in the Hebrew word? And the rest I did in English, but this Hebrew word I put in.
But usually,
There's a reason.
and is just the letter Vav.
It could be that also.
And why Ve'et?
That's a great question. There must be a reason
Oh,
why I got it there.
Because that
So
means
let's learn the Gemara.
Ve'et because it's adding an extra day.
It's adding an extra day.
So the Gemara asks, from where do we know this ruling? Well, there's two questions over here. From where do we know that walled cities celebrate Purim on the 15th? Second question, from where do we know that the definition of walled cities is walled from the times of Yeshua? Like, what's the rationale? This is a festival of Purim that happened 800 years after the time of Yehoshua. Why is it relevant that they were walled at the times of Yehoshua? That's the second question that we're going to learn a bit later. Omar Rava answers the Omar Kra, that the verse that I just showed you says, Al Kain HaYodim HaPrazim. How's it translated over here? Look how is it translated?
The Jews of the villages.
Right, the Jews of the villages. Now that is not a literal translation. That's his interpretation, which what the Gemara interprets. The word prazim means spread out. What does spread out mean? You're not walled.
Right.
It's an open city. If it's an open city, that's called prazim. Prazim means to be scattered, to be spread out, to be open to the elements that surround you. So the interpretation is going to be that the prazim refer to the unwalled cities. And the verse said, "Haprazim hayoshvim b'arei prazim," those that live in the cities that are unwalled. What did the verse say? The scattered Jews who live is spread out make the 14th day of the month of Adar. That's what the verse said. So it's clear in verse 19, which is the first one on the page, it's clear that the unwalled cities keep Purim on the 14th. That we know. That's explicit in the verse. So the Gemara infers, Rava infers, mid the present Barba Asar, if the unwalled cities are the 14th, then perhaps it makes sense to say Mukafim, therefore the walled cities, Bachamish Asar should be the 15th. In other words, we have an issue here. We have one verse talks about the 14th, and that verse is clear. The scattered Jews, the unwalled cities do the 14th. There it's clear. You can't argue with that. You can't say unwalled cities 15th or something. No, it's clear. But the next verse talks about the 14th and the 15th. No, who could it be going? Who could it be talking about? It cannot be talking about the unwalled cities because that's clear in this verse that it must be the 14th.
How do you know it's not talking about the villages? Why are you automatically assuming that it would be the walled cities?
Good question. The villagers do not really get.
The villages are also prazim. They're out in the open.
Very good. The villagers are not. The time of Purim is the 14th and 15th. That is the time of Purim. End of story. Certain people that live in certain locations, i.e. villages, later we came along and we said, okay, we're going to allow you to do certain shtick to make it more convenient for you. But that's not what the pasuk is talking about. The pasuk is talking about the Yom Tov of the 14th and the 15th, which are the 2 days you celebrate Purim. And by the way, the villages are like the Prazim. They're part of the unwalled cities. They happen to be an unwalled city without resources, and therefore we give them a dispensation. But if the pasuk is clear that there's a category of Prazim, a category of unwalled cities, then the pasuk is telling me that the contrast here is there are unwalled cities and there are walled cities. Now, the unwalled cities are clearly the 14th. So when the next verse says to keep it on the 14th and the 15th, who should that be talking about? Who's the 15th? Let's say that that's the walled cities. So that's how you would reconcile the two verses, and that would therefore be the source. Answer our question, the source for the walled cities reading on the 15th. Okay. You like that?
Yeah.
All right, makes sense. The Gemara says, no. Why would that be your conclusion? Ve'ema, perhaps we should say, we can interpret differently. Prazim barbasar. The Prazim, the unwalled cities, as the verse said, clearly is on the 14th. And the fact that the verse gives talks about the unwalled cities, but does not talk about the walled cities, maybe mukafim klal or klal. Maybe walled cities don't have to celebrate Purim. Our assumption was that the fact that the pasuk is mentioning unwalled cities, it's probably dividing between unwalled and walled, and then we're left in the open when do walled cities celebrate. So we said the next verse that mentions the 15th probably refers to walled cities. We made that assumption. The Gemara asks, maybe no. Maybe the instruction for Purim, like Mordechai said, was only for unwalled cities to celebrate. Walled cities do not celebrate Purim.
Then what would 15th be referring to then if it's not the walled?
Maybe it'd be another option for the unwalled cities.
And why wouldn't the people from the walled city celebrate at all?
For the Gemara, V'lav Yisrael Ninhu? What? They're not Jews? We're making a festival for Jewish people, but actually not all. Except for you guys. Yeah, because they live in the city. Well, they're not Jews. They never celebrate Jewish festival. Who was saved in Purim? The Jews were saved. No, they didn't get to celebrate. That's question number one. Question number two, v'oid further, me'hodav ad kush ksiv. The Megillah says that Achashverosh ruled from Hodo till Kush. Where's Hodo and where's Kush?
Kush is in Africa, no?
So the simple opinion is that Hodo is India and Kush is Africa. Ethiopia.
Does that include the Middle East?
Which means this diagram, this was Achashverosh's rule. Let me hold up on the screen for a moment. We have here, I don't know what we have over here. India, all the way through to Ethiopia. So it spans Asia, Europe, and Africa. Achashverosh had historically the largest sovereignty, the largest rule that anybody has had in world history. That is what the Megillah tells us. That's what the Gemara says, and it could be. I cannot confirm this according to secular history. It might be true also. Achashverosh had the largest rule, and then the Megillah says 127 Medinot, countries, provinces. He had the largest rule in ever history.
It was, and you said walled?
No. So if he ruled from Hodo till Kush, and he wanted to destroy all the Jews from Hodo till Kush, and the miracle of Purim celebrates the salvation of all the Jews from Hodo till Kush, tell me, between Hodo and Kush, which is more than half the world, at that time it was most of the world, there were no walled cities. There were walled cities. And they were all part of the salvation. The first question is, they're Jewish also. Jewish festival, all Jews should observe. Second question, not just they're Jewish, they were part of the miracle. They were saved. There were many walled cities in that territory. I think I read some data today. I know I read, but I'm just trying to think if I remember it. That it's estimated there were 100 million people in the world at the time, and in Achashverosh's territory, I think about 50 million of them live, which means half of the world's population was under his
Wow.
reign. That's huge, right? That's the Persian Empire at the time. The Persian superpower was massive, biggest ever. No other superpower empire ever had that amount of control, sovereignty. There's another opinion in the Gemara that Hodo and Kush are actually next to each other. It's not going to be India and Ethiopia. They're next to each other. And basically, just like when you control, it's like a metaphor. Just like when you control two cities next to each other, you have a lot of control. Because they're, the same thing is he had control from one end of the globe to the other end of the globe, all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
It says he was a Moshel Bekippa. He was a ruler of Kippa, like a Kippa. Like, what's a Kippa? Kippa. What's a Kippa? A dome. The whole northern hemisphere, basically, which was most of the recognized, discovered world at the time. He controlled. So why would you say that the 14th is for the unwalled cities, as the verse says, and the 15th and the walled cities don't celebrate? Why would you say that? Okay, fine. We can't suggest that. Good point. So ve'ema. By the way, just to point out again, this is not a conversation that was had in real time. Right? Rava said an opinion, and then later, whoever's redacting this Gemara is putting together this back and forth, right? And there's a discussion here that I think there's a commentary from the Ritva. He was one of the Rishonim. He says all of these. We're gonna continue this conversation. We're gonna make suggestions. Maybe we should say it like this. No. Maybe like that. No. Until we're gonna get the conclusion that we want is that the 14th is for unwalled cities, 15th for walled cities. The Ritva learns it's not like the Gemara is really suggesting it, meaning as if there was really an opinion, an option that held this way. Rather, this is like a conversation showing you how we arrived at the conclusion. And that was the thinking process.
Like eliminating.
Right. Correct. So not that actually somebody stood up in the Beis Medrash and suggested maybe the walled city should not observe Purim. No. But how we asked the question, what's the source for the walled city's 15th? And we're giving an answer. We're working with these psukim trying to figure it out. But we're raising all other possible options to try to explain the psukim and then eliminating them and then arriving at the final conclusion. So this is we're building it up. So first we asked maybe walled cities don't celebrate. We said no, that can't be. Then we say ve'ema, maybe last paragraph of the page, maybe prazim bar beisar. Maybe the unwalled cities will be the 14th, and mukafin and the walled cities bar beisar over chamesar. They could be the 14th and the 15th, as would be implied in the verse. Because if the first pasuk that says clearly the unwalled cities celebrate the 14th, clear. The next pasuk says celebrate Purim the 14th and the 15th. Who's that pasuk talking to? Let's assume it's talking to the walled cities. The previous pasuk, be very nice way to explain. The first pasuk, the first verse talking about the unwalled cities, 14th. Second verse, walled cities, 14th and 15th. So they have 2 days that they can celebrate. As it says in the second verse, to make the 14th a festival, and also the 15th every single year.
Now, why wouldn't that be suggesting that the walled cities be 2 days?
That's what it is.
14th and 15th.
That's the question.
Or 14th or 15th.
No, 14.
Oh. Sorry. Actually, I think you're right. I went ahead of the game. The first assumption is 14th and 15th.
A 2-day Yom.
A 2-day Yom Tov. Let's assume that. That is the question. Correct. And then the next page, 200, the Gemara says, no. Because you have to look at the way the verse is written. If it would be written, the 14th and the 15th with just a vav, as Mario originally asked, and you're linking together in one breath the 14th and the 15th, it would make sense that whoever that verse is talking about has to observe both 14th and the 15th. It would be as you suggested. However, now that it says it a little differently, what does it say? It says Ve'eis Yom Ha'ba'asar, the 14th. Ve'eis Yom Chamesha and the 15th, but with the word ve'eis. That's a key word. Why not just the vav? The vav is a much stronger link together. The ve'eis seems to be less of a link, more of an interruption between the 14th and the 15th. So the Gemara says, asa ace or pasik, this word ace is coming to interrupt, to say, hani bar basar, some on the 14th, v'hani bar chamisha asar, and some on the 15th. Nobody has an obligation to observe 2 days Purim, 14 and 15. The pasuk is not linking them together. The pasuk is saying two separate things, and we're going to learn from there that some celebrate the 14th and some on the 15th. Okay, let's give another suggestion. Ve'ema, let's say, Prazim bar Beisar, the unwalled cities on the 14th, as the first verse says clearly, and then Mokaf in the walled cities. Bo bar Beisar, if they want, they can celebrate on the 14th. Bo bar Chamesar, and if they want, they can celebrate on the 15th. As I said earlier, but I jumped the gun. That's the problem when you learn ahead, right?
Which
you know what's coming.
Which is ridiculous, because how do you give them the option?
Which is a very strange thing.
Give a walled city the option. If you want the 14th, fine. If you want the 15th, fine.
Right. Like, where do we have any precedents for people can decide which day they want to keep Pesach or Hanukkah? We have a lot of people nowadays that do decide, but not because the Torah gives them permission to decide. Yeah, they decide this year I am observing Pesach. Next year I'm not. I can't observe Pesach. It just gets in the way. Whatever. Fine, but not that the Torah says that way. Especially if you understand spiritually, when a day is established to be a festival, it means that that day has an elevated spiritual status. Shabbat, the seventh day of the week, has a spiritual status that makes it Shabbat. And the 15th of Nisan has a spiritual status that makes it into Pesach. It's not just arbitrary, we decided, but it's more than that. It's the whole nature, the whole flow, the whole energy, the whole presence of godliness on that day is different, which is why it's a festival day. So no, how's it going to work over here? Which day has that energy for the festival? Is it the 14th and the 15th? It's like both have, and therefore if both have, then you should keep both. And if neither have, it's a strange thing. Strange suggestion to decide when you want to keep. Now remember, two things. Remember, first of all, like the Ritva said, maybe we're not actually suggesting these as rulings, we're just showing the flow of the conversation. But also remember, we're dealing with a very, very thorny issue. That one verse says the 14th, and one verse says 14th and 15th. So what is the pshat in the second verse?
But if you go on what you just said about the spiritual energy, how would there be a different spiritual energy in a walled city than a unwalled city?
So that's a good question. By the way, there's a beautiful explanation of the Alter Rebbe. Today's his day. Today is the 19th and the 20th of Kislev is the day. The 19th, he was liberated from prison. That's why it's a festive day. But why is the 20th also? So, without getting carried away totally, but why was he in prison? Hold on to your question, but remind me. I shouldn't forget where I really want to come to. But why was he in prison? So, on two accounts. In the eyes, well, he was in prison because other Jews informed on him and got him into prison. Other Jews who, at the time, were called misnagdim, opponents to the Hasidic community. But the opposition was very fierce. There's a lot of hatred, a lot of fear. It was a very, very messy time. And what were their allegations? So their tightness, their claims to themselves was that they were very suspect of this, what they called new religion. These Hasidim, happy, dancing, davening for many hours, like strange things, respecting simple people, putting simple people on the same table as great Torah scholars. A lot of things that were uncommon and strange at the time, and people suspected that this is like a new religion. But that's not a case for the government to arrest him. So they thought the Alter Rebbe was collecting a lot of money, sending it to Israel. At that time, there were several aliyot, several waves of people moving to Israel.
Wait, what years were
This is in the year 1790s. So there's history of certain groups every few years of that moved to Israel. There was great poverty in Israel. I mean, there was great poverty in Russia also, but there were larger numbers of people. So the Alter Rebbe was raising funds, a lot of funds, to help the Yeshuvim, help the settlements. Well, Israel was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, which was at war with Russia. So the claim was that the Alter Rebbe is supporting the Ottoman Empire against Russia, which is treasonous. And therefore he was put into prison. So on the 19th, he was liberated. And then at nighttime, and he was supposed to be taken to the house of one of the big Hasidim. But this big Hasid lived perhaps on one floor of the building, but the Alter Rebbe was taken to the wrong home. Whose home was he taken to? To the home of Avigdor. And Avigdor was the chief misnaged, the chief opponent that really got the Alter Rebbe into prison for 53 days. It was very unpleasant. So he lands up in his home, the home of your arch enemy.
Right, yeah.
And he says, it's recorded that Avigdor made a cup of tea for him. It was like an element of respect, but then he spent many hours really harassing and paining him. And Alter Rebbe said that the 53 days in jail, well, I could handle that. But the few hours I spent in this home were unbearable for me. And then all of a sudden, everybody realized what's going on everywhere. Where's Alter Rebbe? And then we realized that he's in the wrong house, and they came to get him. So the next day, which was when it happened, the 20th, it turned into a festival also. Okay, so it's a big day today. So all the brachot, all the blessings of a great tzaddik who was part of reshaping Jewish life. I mean, no matter which community you belong to today, somehow your life is changed by Chassidut today in many different ways. So that's the blessing of today. Now, why are we talking about Alter Rebbe? Because he gives an interpretation, not in his Hasidic works, in the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of law that he wrote. He says as follows. What's the reason that outside of Israel, there are 2 days Yom Tov? 2 days Pesach, 2 days Shavuot, 2 days, right? And in Israel, there's only one. The Torah says one, but we make it into 2 days. So we know, we spoke about this. Once upon a time, the reason was because we didn't find out when was Rosh Chodesh. It was a doubt. So therefore we kept 2. But now we have no doubt. Now we have a calendar. So we know when is the 15th of the month. So the general idea, as the Gemara says, is Minig Avaseinu B'Yodeinu. This is the tradition. Tradition! Bum, 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 bum. That's how it is. But Alter Rebbe gives a spiritual interpretation. He says every Yom Tov, there's a kind of achievement you're supposed to make. Whatever the theme is, on Pesach, it's the theme of Chirut, of freedom, of redemption. On Sukkot, it's the theme of Simcha, the theme of gratitude to Hashem, of awareness of the protection of Hashem, of Shavuot, the theme of receiving the Torah, whatever the theme is. And there's something you're supposed to experience and accomplish in those days. In Israel, in Eretz Israel, where the light of Hashem and the presence is much greater, is much more intense, you can accomplish all you need to accomplish in just one day. But outside of Israel, where it's a spiritual darkness in the presence of the Shekhinah, the presence of Hashem, the presence of the lights, the spiritual light of that festival is much more dimmed, it takes longer. It takes 2 days to accomplish what it would take 1 day in Israel. That's the reason he gives, which is a beautiful idea. It also helps shape the whole festival for us. Here we're thinking, another Seder, and another day Yom Tov, and another meal, and another day of davening. No, it's where we've got work to do. It takes longer to achieve here what it doesn't take over there.
But it still doesn't answer the question.
So what did you ask?
If you say that each Yom Tov has a spiritual energy attached to it, why would one spiritual energy be in a walled city and another spiritual energy be in an unwalled city?
What I did was, what you reminded me, I brought an example where in Israel, the energy is on this particular day, and outside of Israel, it's on another particular day. So we find an extra day. We find precedent for this. We find precedent that in different locations, there could be different presence. And on a day that someone in Israel is eating chametz, you're eating matzah. You know that? You don't have to go to 2 separate days, to 2 separate locations. you could have in the same location. It could happen, especially when it comes to dateline matters. Let's not get to dateline. That's already messy. Let's just get to, there's a whole discussion. If you're living in America and you travel to Israel for Sukkot or for Pesach.
The other way.
Or the other way.
Makes more.
Could work either way. Do you keep the days of where you're coming from or the days where you're now? There's many different opinions. Are you a guest? Are you a visitor? Are you a resident? Do you have family there? Right? But it could be, according to some opinions, that in the shul, in the home, in the people around you are doing one thing, you're doing something else. If you came from Israel and you visited here, it happened this year. This past year, someone from Israel visited here, and the 8th day of Pesach, I think it was, they did not keep Pesach. So it's bitzina. It's you don't do it publicly because it's maris ayin. It doesn't look right. But it's bitzina. In private, you put on tefillin. You don't come to shul and use tefillin because everyone's in the Pesach davening. In your home, you put on tefillin, but you can eat chametz in your home. You're not keeping Pesach. Your neighbor is eating. If your neighbor eats chametz, that's the worst of sins, and you're eating chametz. So with that, on one block, 2 neighbors could happen. So there's a halachic sort of legal side to look at it. Yeah, it is Pesach, it's not Pesach. You're a Ben Eretz Yisrael, you're an Israeli, you're a chutznik. That's the legal side. But if you want to go into the spiritual explanation that we've been describing, we have to try to make sense of this. In this home, there's a Pesach energy, Pesach light, and this home is not. It can happen. I'll give you another example. It's an interesting thing. There's some examples for this. Go on a tangent for a moment. Something is asur, something is forbidden, something is mutar, something is permitted. Yeah? Chazir, a non-kosher animal. You're not allowed to eat it. A kosher animal, you're allowed to eat. Yes? So the simple legal halachic way to understand this is the Torah says this is allowed, this is not allowed. But why? The Alter Rebbe in Tanya gives the spiritual background to this. It's not just a law. All law is expressing a reality. The animal is a forbidden animal, and this animal is a permitted animal. Why? Because what's the whole idea of eating? The whole idea of eating is to sustain your body, but also to tap into the godly energy within the food to give you energy to go ahead and do good things. Right? As the Torah itself says about the man, eating the man in the desert, lo ala lechem levado yechye adam. Not just on bread alone is the man living. Ki al kol motza pi Hashem yechye adam. On the word of God, you are living. So what does that mean? Now, the Rebbe explains, it's not the bread that's nourishing you. Inside the bread is a divine force. It's a godly creation. There's a godly spark that's nourishing you. Okay? So when you eat, you're actually supposed to be tapping into and refining and elevating and restoring the spark, the godly spark within that, and you're supposed to redeem it and bring it to a higher place. That's the purpose. That's the idea of eating. We'll talk about that more another time. If that's the whole purpose, so this follows. When it comes to a kosher animal, what's the halachic language for a kosher animal? Mutar. What does mutar mean? Permitted. What does mutar also mean in modern Hebrew? Unbound, released, loose. If something is tied up, it's called asur, it's bound, like an asir is a person in prison. And mutar, it's unbound. So the Rebbe says, it's very descriptive. The reason why it's mutar is because it's mutar. The reason why it's permitted is because the divine spirit within that food is unbound, is accessible, and therefore you can eat the food, access the God spark within that food, and do what you need to do. But when it comes to a non-kosher animal, the reason why it's asur, forbidden, is because it's asur, because the divine spark within it is completely locked up, and you are unable to access it. No matter how many blessings you make, no matter how you slaughter it, no matter how you eat it, it doesn't matter. It is completely locked up within it. And if the godly spark is locked up within it, and you have no access to it, then you have no business eating it, because the whole point of eating it was to access the godly spark within it, to restore it and bring it up closer to its source. But if you can't access it, then you have no business eating it. Okay, that's now. Can you think of a case where something is asur and then it turns into mutar? Is something forbidden and then becomes permitted, or vice versa? Can something be permitted and then become forbidden?
Yeah. Well, first is the pig.
No.
And then it's
The pig is forbidden.
right. Yet, as a Jew, you can still go and get my mom has a valve from a bovine.
Yeah, but you're not.
Okay, so you're talking about permissible ways to utilize pig material in terms of medicine, etc., etc. Fair point. Good point. In terms of consumption, all the same.
Oh yeah, you can't eat pork. But it says when the Mashiach comes, you'll be able to eat.
So there is a cryptic medrash that it's not even clear where the source is, and people debate if the source is true or not. But it does say that when Mashiach comes, the chazir will become permissible. Okay, that's
I have maybe. How about a bee, which is not kosher, but the honey is kosher.
The bee is not kosher. The honey is kosher. Okay, so that's actually a really interesting thing. But again, it's not that the bee which was not kosher now became kosher. It's not that which is forbidden became permissible. It's just you're asking, how does something permissible be extracted from something forbidden? And the answer to that is based on how the honey is stored within the bee. It doesn't become part of the bee, just stored within the bee. Fine. That's an interesting thing for itself. Or how does dairy come out of a meat cow? A cow is fleshy, but it produces dairy.
Right.
How does that work? Strange. The milk is not part of the cow, it's just stored within the cow. Okay. But where do we have something that is forbidden and then it became permitted? So really, it doesn't make any sense. Because if the reason it's forbidden, as we said, first of all, the Torah forbids it, but second of all, is because the energy within it is locked up, then at what point will it become, why would it become permitted? Or vice versa. Why would something permitted become forbidden? Now, something permitted becoming forbidden, we have lots of examples where the Rabbanan, the Chazal, forbade permissible things. A lot of times, when Chazal made Xer, like look at Shabbos, look at you brought up milk meat. Look at chicken and milk. Chicken and milk. According to the Torah, you can have a chicken, cheese sandwich.
Really?
Of course, nothing wrong with it. Meat you can't have. Chicken you can have. Chicken's not meat.
But
Fowl's not meat.
it is meat.
Poultry.
It's just different.
Not according to the Torah. According to the Torah, the prohibition of basar v'chalav is meat of cattle.
But actually, it's very specific.
Gedid, it says goat. Yeah, you're right. But we extend it to
Right, but
sheep, cows,
if
etc.
you take it to the
You're right.
to the literal
You're right.
translation, you could have a cheeseburger.
In the literal, it's just the mother and
Even more.
literal, that's
Okay.
The literal doesn't say you can't eat. It says you can't cook.
right.
Let someone else cook it and then you can eat it. But it says it 3 times. This is the only verse, only law in the whole Torah that's brought down 3 times. Why 3 times? So the Gemara says once to prohibit the cooking, once to prohibit the eating, and once to prohibit the benefiting from. Okay. So here you have an example. Something is permissible according to the Torah. A chicken cheeseburger is permissible, but for us it's forbidden. But that, to explain that, it's permissible because we said the energy within it is not locked up. Technically, you could eat it, access the energy within it, and do something productive with that eating. When the Chazal, when the rabbis forbade it, they didn't change that status. They didn't have the power to change. They didn't create the world. Hashem created the world. They can't change the status of that animal. They can just add what's called a prohibition on the gavra, not on the chefza. You ever heard this distinction between gavra and chefza? Gavra means the person, chefza means the object. The object is still permitted. The prohibition is on the gavra, is on you. This that you can't eat the pig is because the chefza, the object, is forbidden. This that you can't eat the chicken cheese sandwich is not because the object is forbidden, but you are forbidden to eat it. So it's the Chazal had the power not to manipulate and change the order of creation. They could just place prohibitions and enactments and decrees on the person. So that's why many things that are technically permitted became forbidden. But Chazal could never permit something which is forbidden, right? So there really almost are no examples, but I'll give you an example.
So you can't really have a chicken with cheese, right?
You cannot have to, absolutely not.
Right.
Not because it's forbidden, but not because it's forbidden, because you're forbidden to have it.
Okay.
For example, if you tell your child you can't eat the cookie, why? Something wrong with the cookie? Nothing wrong with it. What's the proof? You're going to eat it tonight. So nothing's wrong with it. That's the proof. but it's a prohibition on the child.
His cookie, it's my cookie.
Yeah. Yesterday, my daughter brought home a cookie from school. She made it in school. She said, Tati, I made it for you. I said, thank you so much. It's so nice of you. I put it on the counter. I left it there. Okay. Like an hour later, she comes out to me, Tati, I'm so sorry. I ate your cookie.
That was better. At least she apologized.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's better than eating the cookie.
Okay. Here's an example. You have the prohibition of arla, fruit which grows on a tree. The first 3 years, you are not allowed to eat from the fruit. It's asur
First 3 years.
of the tree, which, by the way, is not such a big law because how much fruit does a tree grow in the first 3 years anyhow?
Exactly. But I thought it was
Either no fruit or very not good fruit.
Is it the first 3 years total, or is it the first 3 years of it fruiting?
Okay, when we start the threes is a good question. From the time of planting, from the time of it sprouting. Okay, it's a good question.
Okay.
In the 4th year, what's the law? You're allowed to eat it, but you have to eat it in Yerushalayim. And in the 5th year, you can eat it in your home.
So it's fine.
Well, hold on a minute. And this is a biblical law. So biblically, you're not allowed to eat the fruit during the first 3 years. What does this tell me? Because it's asur, meaning the energy within it is inaccessible. You have no business touching these things. And then it becomes mutar the next year. You're allowed to eat it. What changed? How did the energy? If it was asur, it's asur. How did asur become mutar?
With time.
Whoa! Where do you have such a concept? Time changes things. How long will it take for a pig to become kosher? How long will it take for a beef burger to become kosher? It doesn't. It's not on. All of a sudden, wait 3 years, it's going to become kosher.
But there's a lot of time things. There's the Shemitah year. There's a lot of time things that you're allowed to eat and not eat and all that.
Right. Well, like Shabbos crops too, every 7 years.
Wait. You have to explain. Give me some examples. It's not simple. Shemitah is a completely different case. Shemitah says it's a prohibition on you. Prohibition. It's not changing the status of the chefs of the object. The land is the land. The fruit is everything's fine. You cannot work. It's a law against you. But here we have an example. It's not a law against me. When the Torah prohibits it, it's because the object, the chefza, is forbidden. And all of a sudden, a year later, the chefza, the object becomes forbidden. How did its status change? Where do you have such an example of status changing? Very strange thing. But it exists. Which means, how are you going to explain it? We're going to have to explain that somehow, as it transitions into its 4th year, its energy changes. Till now, it's been a recipient of prohibitive energy. We call it the klippa. For the first 3 years, it's a recipient of klippa energy. Klippa means the peel. It's locked up in the peel. The godliness is hidden there. You can't access it. A year later, it's receiving its energy from kedusha, from holiness, or from non-forbidden sources. And now you can start to eat it. We've just found an example of this change. So, the change of energy. So similar to, but different, but I guess it's a similar concept. What happens when a Nondru becomes a Jew? You're the same person, you look the same, you have the same body, your brain is the same, your heart, nothing changed. You have a change of soul identity. Yesterday, your soul was the soul of a non-Jew. Today, tomorrow, this soul was taken out of you, another soul was put into you. It's a complete change. It can happen. God does that. It's a strange thing. Can't explain how I can't do it. Hashem can do it. So now you're talking about we're talking about where different days are different energies for different people, or different locations, or even the same location, the 2 different neighbors. Yeah, for you, God is giving this kind of energy. For you guys, giving this kind of energy. It can happen. It can happen. Mysteries of the universe.
This is the Torah.
Of the Torah. Okay. So where are we holding? Let's summarize. How do we know the 15th for the walled cities? Yeah. So we said, well, the first verse will be the 14th, the unwalled cities. The second verse will be the walled cities. The Gemara says maybe walled cities don't have to celebrate. No, doesn't make any sense. So maybe they have to celebrate both 14th and 15th. No, because it says the S separates. So maybe the 15th, the walled cities can do either or. That's how we got it. either the 14th or the 15th. Right? That was that last question. They can choose in the walled cities. The Gemara says, we're going back to what we said earlier. Bismanehem. Remember that word? Bismanehem told us, the time for this one is different than the time for that one. The walled cities and unwalled cities have two different times. If you would allow walled cities to celebrate either 14th or 15th, then it could be that walled cities have the same time as unwalled cities because they may celebrate the 14th. So therefore, they have to have different times, and we know that unwalled cities are for sure the 14th. So that from there we deduce that when is walled cities? 15th.
So is this the ruling? I mean, is this...
Almost. The Gemara tries one last desperate attempt, just to make sure we've exhausted all possibilities or eliminated all possibilities. Ve'emar betzleisar. Maybe the walled city should celebrate on the 13th. Who said 15th?
That last thing there said 14th or 15th.
That's talking about Shushan. This is what the Gemara is thinking. Who's Mordechai talking to? The Jews of Persia. And he's saying, unwalled cities, 14th. Shushan, 15th. Regular walled cities, didn't say. How do we know? We can make up anything we want. We know they have to celebrate because you kind of some Jews not celebrating Purim. Maybe it's the 13th.
Why couldn't Mordechai be more specific?
He was very specific. Why? Don't ask a question on Mordechai. Ask a question on us. Why don't we have the tools to understand Mordechai's words? Why are we so dumb? Why are our minds so verstoppt? We say in Yiddish. You know what verstoppt means? Blocked. Clogged. Why are our minds so clogged that we can't understand the pure words of Mordechai? The Gemara answers, Shushan. Why would Shushan, which is the walled city, celebrate the 15th? But other walled cities are their own day. If Shushan is the 15th because it's a walled city, it makes sense that all other walled cities should be like Shushan. It's just simple. It's logic. It's reasonable. And based on that, we've exhausted all the possibilities. We're going to conclude as follows. The first verse said clearly the unwalled cities celebrate on the 14th. The second verse, which spoke about the 14th or the 15th, is basically saying the unwalled cities are going to be the 14th, and the walled cities, just like Shushan, are all going to be on the 15th only.
But you said again the word for. Ve'et is and.
The is and. Ve'et technically is and. But the way the Gemara interprets it, the would have been an and, meaning joining the two together into a 2-day celebration. Ve'et, instead of using the separates them a little bit, making one or the other, and not a 2-day celebration. That's how we know that walled cities are the 15th. So the Gemara asks a question as follows. What does it say? What does it say about the celebration? Therefore, the scattered Jews who live spread out make the 14th day on the month of Adar a day of. I underlined this thing. A day of joy, feasting, festive day, sending portions. These are most of the mitzvot of Purim. Most of the activities of Purim. But there's one mitzvah that's not being mentioned over here. What are the 4 mitzvahs of Purim? What are the 4 mitzvahs of Purim? Megillah. Suda. Mishlach manot. Here it says Suda. It says feasting. It says gifts. Gifts can be both Mishlach manot. But what doesn't it say? Reading the Megillah. So on the 14th, have a feast, give gifts, give charity. What about Megillah? Doesn't say that. When do you read the Megillah? So the Gemara says, with regards to the activities of Purim, having the feast, giving gifts, it's clear. We do it on the 14th. Zechira min olam, but what about the mitzvah of Zechira? Zechira means to remember. The whole point of the Megillah is to remind us of the story. When is that mitzvah? It doesn't say when. Maybe it's a different day. Maybe it's the whole month. And remember, we said that the villages can read on different days. And we also pointed out, according to many opinions, even when a villager has the right to read on the 13th, 12th, 11th, it might just be for Mikra Megillah, for reading the Megillah. The other mitzvahs should be on regular Purim. The Torah says here, the Megillah says on regular Purim, the 14th, do the other activities. Megillah seems to be different. Megillah, even for the villagers, could be a different day. No, so maybe even in a regular city, doesn't say anything about Megillah over here. So the Gemara answers a beautiful answer. It's a really important answer. What does the pasuk say? Hayomim ha'ele nizkarim v'na'asim. I may even printed this pasuk somewhere. I printed it because it's also important for the next Gemara. And these days shall be nizkarim, remembered, v'na'asim, and celebrated. Why are the two expressions? They should be remembered and celebrated. Are they not the same thing? When you're remembering it, you're celebrating it. When you're celebrating it, you're remembering it. But it seems like a repetitious expression. So the Gemara says there's two key words over here: nizkarim and na'asim. Iskish, the pasuk is comparing zechira la'asiyah, remembering to doing. Remembering is the mitzvah of reading Megillah. Asiyah are the activities. Since the activities, their mitzvah is on the 14th, as the pasuk says clearly. And the next, a few psukim later, it says, these days shall be remembered and celebrated. That tells me the same day that we're celebrating with all the activities is the same day that we're also remembering, which is reading the Megillah as well.
What you didn't show before?
A little bit before. This one tells me on the 14th to celebrate with all the activities. Have a feast, give gifts, etc. It doesn't tell me when to read the Megillah. But this one says, on this day, remember and celebrate. And the Gemara says, remember means to read the Megillah. Celebrate means all the activities over here. Well, from here I'm learning that the remembering, i.e. Megillah reading, and the celebrating, i.e. all the activities, should always be together. Well, if this tells me that the activities are on the 14th, then that tells me also that the remembering, which is the Megillah reading, should also be on the same day as the activities, which is the 14th. Now, this last teaching is actually a very famous one. Niskarim v'nasim. So let's just broaden this idea for a moment. These days shall be remembered and celebrated. If you think about it, there's a very practical idea over here. It's your wife's anniversary. I mean your wife's. If it's your wife's, then it's yours also.
It was my anniversary like yesterday.
Mazel tov.
How many years?
7.
7.
Nice.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
you married us.
right here we
Right
were.
there.
Right here. Yes. Wow. Did you remember or did you celebrate your anniversary?
Both.
Oh.
We went to Asiatico.
Oh, how was that?
Expensive, but great.
Yeah,
It's a new kosher restaurant. It's like a South Beach.
There's this guy who I spoke to yesterday who never goes to kosher restaurants, kosher at all, but he went there. He said, I was very impressed.
Yeah, it's an amazing.
He said most people there were not even Jewish. They looked like something.
Yeah, there was a party of girls that like, I don't know, 20-something.
And you had to make a reservation like well in advance, like a few days.
It was a Tuesday night, so we made it like Sunday we made it for Tuesday.
2 days before.
Yeah, but it was a Tuesday. It was full.
It was full, and you're saying it's expensive, but it's good.
Amazing.
Okay.
And just in case you're wondering, we each had 2 drinks, and we had a main. It was $222.
2 drinks and 2 mains?
She had 2 drinks. I had 2. Each drink is $20. Okay. It was we had duck tacos, $48. It's expensive, but again, I'm only going to special. Yeah.
All right. So there's celebrating and there's remembering.
Yeah, so I did both. We did.
Let's give an example. Shabbat. You could have 2 kinds of people who are not doing Shabbat properly. You can have all three. I'm not going to talk about the person that's doing nothing. You can have some people who are remembering but not celebrating, and some people who are celebrating but not remembering. A person who remembers but does not celebrate, meaning I'm aware at Shabbos, I think about Shabbos, we talk about it. Where it's in the memory, meaning it's a conscious awareness we have. It's Shabbat today, we talk about it, but we're not celebrating. We're not doing what the Torah says to do. There's laws that how to celebrate. We're not doing that. We could have vice versa. Like people who celebrate, they go through the laws, go through the motions, go to synagogue, have the meals, whatever it is, but they're not remembering. It's all mechanical. Did you get into the energy, the spirit of Shabbos? Did your neshama, did your soul, did you experience Shabbos, or you just perform Shabbos? So some people experience but not perform. Some people perform but don't experience. They're both wrong. The pasuk says, Niskarim v'nasim. Every special day, every festival day, you have to do Niskarim v'nasim. You have to be spiritually, emotionally engaged with the specialty of the day, feeling it, reflecting on it, talking about it. But you have to also be implementing and performing what the Torah says, the ways to do it, the laws of the Torah. Niskarim v'nasim. It's a really important idea.
So in going back to Purim, so you can still be doing all the things and also listening to Megillah and still not know. Right?
What I'm describing is not. I'm making a drush on what the Gemara says. In the Gemara's language here, Niskarim refers to Megillah reading, Nasim refers to all the other mitzvot. In the Gemara's language, and you have to do both on the same day. I'm taking a step away from the Gemara and creating two different other themes. Niskarim is the memory and the reflection of the day, and Nasim is the mitzvah performances of the day. Sometimes you can have one without the other. You have to have both. No, the people that light. Do you light Shabbat candles? I light them in my heart. Careful, you shouldn't get heartburn. Careful, right?
That's a good way to get heartburn. Yeah.
Right. I celebrate in my heart. A lot of people celebrate things in their heart, which is really good. But imagine on your anniversary, imagine a whole day.
Honey, I love you in my heart.
Yeah, the anniversary.
I love you.
The anniversary passed by. The day passed by. The next day, Michelle's furious at you. Mario, I don't understand. You didn't do anything for my anniversary. I was thinking about you the whole day.
That's gonna fly over.
Yeah, see,
real
see,
well.
But it could, other end also, you could be, you bought a gift and he did this and he did did the motions. But did you celebrate the anniversary? Did you reflect on how fortunate you are?
Oh,
how
buy
blessed
her a
you
present.
are?
That's good enough, okay?
So that's for Nasim, but not Nizkarim.
Right.
Shoin. Now we're going to start something else about the next thing. Is we asked two questions in the beginning. Okay, let's summarize. The Mishnah says the walled cities from the time of Yeshua keep on the 15th. We said, from where do you know? So I said there's two questions. A, from where do you know walled cities keep on the 15th? B, where do you know the definition of walled cities is walled from the times of Yeshua? Question A, we've answered. Do you now know the source for where walled cities celebrate on the 15th? You better say yes.
Yeah, from that third sentence there.
From the pasuk.
Yeah.
And how you know that's the interpretation? Because we explored every other possible interpretation and we arrived at this. One question still remains. How do you know that the definition of walled cities is walled from the times of Yeshua?
That we have it. Yeah,
That is next week.
I guess you had to pick a time.
I would have thought that the most reasonable, sensible time would have been the time of the miracle, the time of the Purim story. Shushan. Whatever, during the Shushan times, whoever was
Sure,
walled.
there's a good reason why.
Ah, you bet there's a good reason. Shkoyach. Find out next week. You think you're going to be able to sleep till then?